For my next speech, I rewrote my argumentative speech about the great art of literature, and so this is my lesson 8 speech. So my first question is, should Europeans teach the language of English to the African culture? Some of you may say yes, and others are saying no. So for some people, language and written literature lies at the center of a culture. It defines them and it makes it unique to their people. If you consider the true African literature content, then you would also have to accept all of their oral stories that are passed down from generation to generation. African literature isn't written because this culture's stories are told by mouth, and a lot of them may not have a written language. So I don't believe that teaching the African people English could be the best way to develop their literature. This tradition shouldn't be hindered by a language that's foreign to their own culture, and there are 3 reasons. First of all, each African village has its own language, and some villages will speak and write their language while others only speak it. Their stories are passed down verbally. And one example I have is one of my sources, my visual aids, is these 3 elephants are painted, kind of like a little elephant family. But African people may use things like these to tell their stories versus versus writing down their stories in a book and explaining them. They may have like little painted elephants that they made from wood to tell their stories instead of having a book to write them down so that people may read them. So however they use their language, it shouldn't change the fact that it is their true native language. And making them learn a new language could be like changing the core ingredients to a cake. It wouldn't taste well, it wouldn't work well, it wouldn't bake the same way. So the African people, they might find having to learn a new language offensive. I can't think of anyone that would enjoy being forced to learn Spanish or French or Italian just so that they could write down a story for those people to read. And thirdly, the English language doesn't actually guarantee a change in lifestyle. Even though in America, our lifestyles are very different from the lifestyles of people in Africa. So just by learning our language doesn't mean that their lifestyle is going to change the same and be the same as in America. Instead, this new language may in fact complicate things for the worse. So I want to share a piece from an article that I recently had read. The author said this: language was twisted into a mechanism that separated children from their own history because their own heritage were shared only at home, relying on orators in their native language. The author's name is Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and he makes the point that language defines us as people. And he says that you can't separate people from their culture because if you do so, you will also separate them from their family, their history, and their home. He was a well-written, versed and studied man on African literature, and he also suggested that the African people have already lost some heritage in their past, just with conflicts and wars and differences, and they've lost this culture due to using a mechanism that isn't their native language. And one other example of when this could occur is when missionaries and others have tried to help these native cultures in the past, and they go over and they want to teach English and all these things instead of just helping them get clean water. So this would be similar to me being told to tell a story in Japanese when my native tongue is English. In order for me to do that, I would learn a completely different language just to tell a story so that the Japanese people could understand me. It wouldn't actually help me communicate with anyone except someone else, which isn't in my country. So in order for native villages and their countries to preserve their culture, I think they need to preserve their stories. I believe it's of utmost importance that they learn to speak them in their own tongue and they can write them down in their own languages. Today we're a really inventive people, and if we needed to translate something or we wanted to translate their stories, we could always figure it out. But once the original piece of literature, which is written in its own native tongue, is lost, it's lost forever. And many times when different languages have different meanings for words, they might, for example in Spanish, you might want to say this word, but when you translate it to English, it doesn't translate, or there isn't a word to translate. So that's another problem. If the stories are written down in their own native language, they have their own words and their own meanings for things. But when you translate it to English, a lot of that translation and the art and the beauty of their language will be lost. So native villages have every right to put their literature down into books in their own languages, and we could even supply them with the necessary tools to do so. But we shouldn't force them into a new form of communication and a new language to learn. The second reason that native African people don't need to learn English is due to their lifestyle. It's very difficult for English-speaking people to communicate with tribal Africans because both lifestyles are very different from one another. Tribal life isn't anything like an English person's way of life because of the diversity in lifestyle, and the same language is not needed. So every day we might wake up and get in our vehicle, our cars, and we drive to work, we go to work, we might come home and go to the grocery store and come home and cook dinner. We live in these houses, but in Africa, in the tribal village way of life, they don't have grocery stores, they don't have cars, they don't have jobs. Their job is to like support their family, find clean water, grow food, things like that. So even speaking with one another, we wouldn't be able to relate very much because of our diversity in our lifestyles in our different countries. So when we take a look at who really wants the Native Africans to learn English, is it the Africans or the English? Well, obviously the English are the ones that have the motive to change the way that the Africans communicate. And if it isn't the goal of them to change their language, then why would they give all of the effort? Sending teachers into tribal villages takes a great amount of preparation, money, and planning, and if the tribe isn't striving for this change, then the tribal people could potentially become offended and be turned off by the English person's ideas. The African tribes might not appreciate even the sounds of our language because they are content with their own language and their culture. And I think it would be a shame for them to give up their native tongue just so that us English people could use and understand their literature. It would be traditional for them to have their own way of speaking and writing. But forcing them to learn this different language isn't respecting who they are as people, and it's not respecting their unique culture and diversity. My third point is what the future will bring for the tribes if English is made their language. So bringing English into their tribes doesn't guarantee hope for the people. It may not help them relate to other English-speaking people, but what else will it provide? English does not provide any help to better their culture or enhance their literature for their tribe. The future of their language will be hindered by the impact of English. English will change the way that their ceremonies occur, how their traditions are remembered and passed down orally, and ultimately the tribe's culture could be changed. It won't remain traditional as it was, and the stories will be written down for English-speaking people to tell about the tribe and its unique culture. But if English is forced into them, their traditions and unique qualities will be changed eventually over time. One other example is that special sounds of each tribe's language can be lost. For example, the Swahili say ago, which means you are listening, and then to answer you would say ame, meaning yes, I am listening. And this is just one small example of how unique their languages are. And when you look at the spelling of ago, it's spelled A-H-C-H-G-O, which you wouldn't know to pronounce it that way. So once English is present, they may lose these unique sounds and words and things like that. Bianco also says that with all the war, the third peoples are doubly exploited and oppressed. And he says that this idea may be exactly the opposite of what the English-speaking people wanted. However, once the African people are taught this language, they may become exploited, allowing the world to fight for their lands and their resources. And this future would be very unfair to a group of people who have been known throughout their life as rich in culture, strong in tradition, and deep in the belief of oration and storytelling. So integrating English is likely to backfire. It could cause their culture to have a lot of grief that's not needed instead of help, and all because that we wanted their literature. So all these reasons why African culture should be preserved in their native tribal languages show that they shouldn't be taught English or forced to be taught English. Teaching them the English language could have detrimental effects due to the culture overall, and it will cause individual languages to be lost. Inflicting this language into the tribes wouldn't preserve their cultures, it wouldn't preserve their ways of life, and the people of Africa deserve to be respected by the world. So forcing them to learn a new language could harm their lifestyles. They could be misunderstood and instead retaliate against the Englishmen. The last reason is that these countries already struggle in economics, finance, health, and overall problems because they are already underdeveloped countries. Basically, they're just some of them are struggling to get clean water every day. And teaching them this language doesn't promise a brighter future, but only the possibilities of one. There must be another way to help give them a brighter future by keeping their culture and traditions from harm. The underlying idea is that their culture will be affected, their languages will change because of English, and we will in the end lose what was great art, an art of the great literature of African storytelling. So one other thing I have is there's a map which I'll attach, and it talks about all of the different languages in Africa. So in Africa, instead of like the United States where we all speak English as our main language, in Africa there's about 1,500 to 2,000 African languages. So you can see the different groupings. The Afro-Asiatic is 200, it's in the blue. And then the Nilo-Saharan is in the yellow, and it has about 140 languages. And then the Niger-Saharan is, it's in the like red and orange area, and it has more than 1,000 languages, and it covers 2/3 of Africa. And then the Khoisan is in the western part of southern Africa in the green. So all these languages are very unique to each area of Africa and their cultures, and it would be really hard to teach all of them English. We might lose a couple hundred different languages just by trying to make them speak a different language. Thank you.